Hello and welcome back. In this module, we have discussed the relation between music and identity. We have seen that music offers a way to express our identity, but also that music can play an important role in actually constructing and experiencing identity. In addition, we've discussed the idea that identity is best understood as a process, something that's continuously in flux. And this being in flux is to some extent steered by the society we live in. Now, within this societal context, music plays an important role because it can be a way to express social and cultural values. However, music also plays an important role in our journey to find our own place within that given society. So we hope by now that it's clear that music does so much more than only express who we are. In fact, music has an important role to play in the process of becoming who we are.
I think that's a very important point that you raised here, that music is not only there to express our identity, which seems to presuppose that the identity is already there and then somehow expressed in music, but that music is actually able to construct, to produce an identity.
Sure.
Which would then mean that identity is not something that already exists, that is a stable, a core self, but that it changes according to the situations, according to the contexts, and that music plays an important role in that. Now, if I would play this, maybe people would, think that through this music that I'm playing, that actually I'm a kind of free jazz musician. So the music I'm playing is constructing a kind of identity. If I would play this, however, that of course would give a very different idea of the identity that I want to express. So maybe in the terms of Pierre Bourdieu, I would, with this music, produce a different kind of cultural capital.
Yeah, so I like this point you raise, and we have talked about Pierre Bourdieu, and he deals with these two aspects of identity. On the one hand, we have society and its constraints and its inclinations and patterns, right, that steer our identity towards one side. On the other hand, we have our own internal freedom to choose our own path within that society. Now, one often heard critique on this idea of Bourdieu is that he tends to overemphasize the role of society with respect to music and identity. What are your thoughts about this critique?
Yeah, I think we cannot escape that every society, every community has its own categories, its own concepts, its own classification systems. So we are bound to that. So for example, I am a father. The point is, of course, that I am a father in relation to my daughter. So it's not that I'm a father a priori, that I'm always already a father, but I become a father in a relation with my daughter. But in a general category, that is father. Nevertheless, within that category, I have a lot of freedom. I can have many roles as a father in relation to my daughter. So on the one hand, I would agree with Bourdieu that it's very important, all these concepts and classifications that we have, but within those classes, within these categories, we have some freedom to play with them.
Sure, but just to get it crystal clear, to see the analogy between the father on the one hand, which we could call a social construct, a socially determined identity on the one hand, and the freedom to choose your path within that socially defined space. How does that analogy work with respect to music and identity?
Yeah, I think where I would disagree with Bourdieu is that for him the connection, for example, for listening to classical music and being a part of the elitist or bourgeois community within a society, I think that is too strict. Especially in contemporary times, we listen to many different kinds of music. People are simultaneously listening to classical music, to jazz, to pop music, to whatever music. So on the one hand, our identities are scattered, or on the other hand, you could say that one identity can contain many different music. So music is actually expressing many different identities simultaneously.
Sure.
But one thing, so we talked about listening to music, we talked about music making. One thing actually that we tend to forget in this discussion about identity is, in my opinion, is the role of the body. So listening and music making takes place through the body.
Yes.
So my question would be, what is the relation actually between the body and identity?
Well, that's a really interesting question, and also I think a quite challenging question. I think there's two ways to look at this question of the relation between the body on the one hand and music and identity on the other. If we take a more traditional look, identity is something which is, let's say, unchanging in the sense that me, Hafez, there's something about me which is the same when I was 1 year old, when I was 10 years old, when I was 20 years old, when I was 50 years old, and so on and so forth. However, the body is exactly the house where we have all these changing features about ourselves, right? So our desires, our inclinations, our sensual feelings, and so on and so forth. So it almost seems as if the body is the place where all these features happen that are quite in opposite to our identity. And we can even take this idea a step further. For example, I want to be a great musician. However, my bodily desires are standing in my way of becoming this musician because I want to go to the bar, have a drink, I feel sleepy, so I'm not going to study. So all these bodily desires are luring me away from the person who I really am. That's, I think, a very traditional way of looking at the relation between the body and identity. However, I think there's a more fruitful way of looking at it, in the sense that we are not people who have bodies, but we are our bodies. That is to say that when we listen to music, that is in fact an embodied experience. Just, for example, when I was just listening to you, there was no disconnect between my intellectual faculties listening to you and the feeling, the bodily feeling I got from listening to that music. So I hope these two views both have merits to them, but I think especially this second one is particularly interesting in trying to get away from this disconnect between the body on the one hand and our identity on the other.
Okay, well, thanks a lot. I hope that you can develop your own ideas about music in relation to individual identity or collective identity, how music gets an identity when it's connected to certain situations and contexts, for instance, presented as background music or in a concert setting, and how music is related to the way we can think about bodies. When we dance, when we sing, when we clap, when we move to music. I mean, there's a direct connection between music and our bodies. So I hope that you can develop your own thoughts about identity, music and the body, and we hope to see you back in the next module, which will be on music and politics.
See you next time.